Hey, welcome to the Duke of Work podcast. Today we're talking to Vidusha Nathavitharana. Vidusha is the founder and destiny architect of High Five Consultancy and Luminary Learning Solutions. He is a multidisciplinary consultant who specializes in leadership training and has been featured on TEDx Colombo for the leadership learning framework, and he has over 15 years of hands-on experience in over 20 countries, having trained over 100,000 people, and has led HR and HRD initiatives that have won accolades globally. Vidusha is also recognized as one of the world's top 30 leadership professionals for 2020 by Global Gurus Top 30, and is listed as one of the top 50 thought leaders by Thinkers 360, and is a listed member of the Organizational Culture Champions for 2022 by LeaderHum. And he's on a mission to help people be the best they can be by cutting through the BS and fluff and taking a no-nonsense approach to leadership and personal development. Vidusha, it's an honor and pleasure to have you on.
Thank you very much for having me.
This is exciting. I mean, we had a really interesting chat just prior to this. And before we dive into the work that you're doing and the work that you're helping kind of develop, in my opinion, around leadership, around HR, around employee well-being and understanding that landscape, I actually want to talk about the way that you actually operate in doing that work, the way that have you structured the business or the company or the organization in a certain way where it's now a platform, and how you're actually able to, for lack of a better term, create some incentive plans or opportunities that I've never heard of before. And I kind of want you to explain a little bit about sharing 50% of your company's income with those who work with you. That's significantly different for me. So I'm curious to know about what had to be true in your mind to be able to identify that this is the best path forward, and what you're seeing because what you've seen come through implementing that kind of plan for your team.
All right. That's a few dimensions to digest all at once. So let me break it up for you. For starters, thank you for picking up on it, because when we started the business, I must admit that it was more of an experiment than a textbook start of an organization. So let's start there to say that I must admit that there was a lot of trepidation in it, and there was a lot of anxiety around it. And 9 times out of 10, whenever I would mood the idea with friends and family, they would raise eyebrows to say, are you really sure you want to go down this path? So here's the backstory to this. The backstory is very simple. I've always tried to see whether there was a way that business and opportunity and a certain amount of, for a lack of a better word, equality can actually exist. And that's a tough one, because 9 times out of 10, you would find that a business starts because of an idea or capital, and everybody else inside the business, apart from the people who own it, are working for it. Now, you can play with the words beautifully from a marketing perspective, right? You can always turn around and say, we don't have anyone working for us. We work with them, and so on and so forth. But take a look at a typical organization and take a look at the disparity between a CEO and the junior most member of the organization. And you will see a vast difference. And rightly, I'm not throwing pot shots at the status quo. Okay. I'm just trying to give you.
You're making an observation. The observation, I mean, that line of thinking of the CEO, the disparity to a junior or entry level worker or employee, it's around who took the most risk and a risk reward. So that's the observation that we're making here.
Absolutely. And also from the perspective of the person who is starting the business, probably has the biggest risk of all, and therefore would get the biggest reward. And that's fine. Now, my thinking was, this is true until the business starts out, pays off its capital, and starts making net profit after everything has been paid off. Then what happens? Does the paradigm still hold true? So in my mind, any organization doesn't become successful because of just one thing. It's always a combination of things. There is a requirement of good investors. There is the requirement for good employees, a good strategy, great customers, a great product. All of it has to come together. It doesn't happen because of a one-sided affair. We got lucky because we work in a space where knowledge, insight, experience, exposure is the commodity.
Mhm.
It's not capital. So what I bring as a trainer to the organization is different to what someone else can bring, but at the same time, equally important. So when I started out, I played with the idea, what happens if we change the paradigm and turn around and say, you know what? We are all equal partners in this process. How would that look like financially? And on a whim and a toss of a coin, whether to do it or not. Honestly, honestly, that's how it happened. Because I played with this inside my mind, and I did the typical, here are the pros, here are the cons, here's how you would mitigate risk and the whole 9 yards. And then eventually you had to take a decision on it, and I couldn't make one. So if you want to kind of give recognition to somebody, give recognition to that coin, which I still hold in my memory book. I tossed a coin, and heads, we do this, and tails, we don't. And heads it was. So we decided from day dot, from the time we started out, that we would share 50% of the net earnings with the people that work with us. And it has stayed through that way for the last 16 years. So how we do that is pretty
Wow.
simple. And I guess we are very lucky to be in the space we are in, because any trainer who does a program, we invoice a client, and you would find that literally 10% would go to the sales team for bringing in the business. And the rest of the 90% gets split right in the middle. 45% gets retained within the business. 45% gets paid to the trainer who delivers the program. So that's pretty clear
Interesting.
and straightforward. In club programs where there are multiple trainers getting involved, we take a look at the number of days that they contribute towards and then pay accordingly. More complicated projects, which involves others versus just only trainers, then we have a systematic way of breaking that down as well. We share 50% of the net earnings with the people that work with us, and everything else, from making sure the operations team salaries are paid, the marketing and the branding work, any hardware that is required, any material for the training programs, and all of that is borne by the company. Now, I literally, as the owner of the business, get paid pretty much the same way. I take what is owed to me based on the programs I run and nothing else. And at the end of the year, the money gets reinvested in growth. So that's how the business operates. So I like to call it a platform for people to come into, realize their potential as a trainer, add value. And if they're good, market conditions play for itself. You don't necessarily have to do anything. If you're really good, your clients will ask for you more often than the others. So we are in a space where we help each other grow to our fullest potential. And the ultimate litmus test of how good we are ultimately will be based on how many times the clients would ask for a particular trainer.
It makes a lot of sense. There's the healthy competition part. And just to make sure that I understand the distinguishment, it was because you mentioned that this is mostly knowledge work, like the application of information. And that's why you kind of debate in that idea of, should I pay the 50% to them or not, to these trainers, because the value add there, it's almost like product and knowledge, correct? Because they are part in terms
Absolutely.
of the product, and in terms they're delivering their knowledge in package of a product to the end customer.
Absolutely. And again, slightly differently from the perspective of a traditional business,
Mhm.
we do certainly have a process and a methodology in how we train. So every trainer that comes to us would get inducted into that process,
Mm.
inducted into that way of running the business and running a program, get inducted into a methodology that we've created, which is uniquely ours. So what the trainer needs to bring to the party is the tacit knowledge. And we are very careful here. We do distinguish between training, lecturing, and simply doing a motivational speech.
Well, that's important. That's really important because I have a lot of trainers, quote unquote trainers, that are lecturers, and some people who think that their training or information is information, but it's more motivation. Can we dive into that? Because I think that's really important to distinguish here.
Biggest kind of challenge to that is to understand that If you are a trainer, for starters, you need to be a domain specialist.
Mhm.
I think you should have worked, and I'm talking of training in soft skills in what we do
Mhm.
specifically. It is important that you have worked in that setting for at least, I think, a decade, because the nuances and the subtleties of actually putting something into play at work is very different to hypothetically speaking about it or reading a book and
Oh
professing
yeah.
to know it. We always throw in the example of knowing something and being able to do something. We can all understand swimming by watching a little video clip on YouTube. We'll understand what swimming is all about. But that doesn't mean you can swim. Our job as trainers is to make sure that you can deliver on the skill sets that are required, not merely knowing it, but being able to do it. So the
It's a
distinction,
wisdom. There's that level of wisdom with applied knowledge.
absolutely. And again, from a distinction perspective, knowledge, applied knowledge, and a result out of that application. I think what we are gunning for is being able to bring a result out of application. Because sometimes you can apply it, not get any results. And what's the point in that, right? Our job as trainers is to be able to not only give you a tool, but to enable you to use the tool and then practically work it out in an actual work setting and get a better result through it.
So
That is
training
when our job is
produces result,
absolutely.
knowledge, or like what was the thing? Training, motivational speaking, and lecturing. Lecturing just produces information, which take it or leave it. It can be like not used. And then motivation is just like the key, like it's a motivational speech or it's a motivational act to encourage you. But I think training, you have to attach it to the end outcome that it has to produce a workable either product
Absolutely.
or workable output behavior, which is significant, which I think has much more intentionality in how you actually
Absolutely.
prepare the information and the environment for the student or the learner to absorb.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Without a result, we actually draw the distinction when we do products as well. We do tell our clients that there are knowledge sharing sessions and then there's training. We do both. For example, you want to learn a little bit about diversity and inclusivity in the workplace. A half day session, panel discussion, you'll know about it. But
Mhm.
that's it. You're not going to have a diversity inclusive organization after that. It's just not going to happen that way.
Yeah.
We can have an awareness session on leadership for the senior management team about how empathy matters in leadership or how collective leadership works. That doesn't mean that it will translate into action or results.
Yeah.
So training is by and large process driven, not event driven. You cannot have
Mm.
training being looked upon as an event. It's not. It's a process and it
Interesting.
needs to be designed around the end object.
That's really key, and it's important because when you and I are talking, we're talking about ideas. When we talk about empathy, something that you observe and that you practice, but these are ideas when it comes to soft skills. Leadership isn't something that you can see in nature and there's a leadership happening. It's something that you have to imagine and then behave in that belief of yourself or that new identity, then you exact or you execute as a leader. And with these softer skills, when we bring it back to training, I think it's just important to distinguish that when you train for like a sport, you actually practice the specific routines or the processes. I think that was a key word to be able to
Exactly.
execute at the game. But because we're talking about things that aren't just material, these are psychological, these are ideas, these are ideals, these are virtues. It takes more chewing around to actually embody them and practice them, which I think is really important. And I do want to dive into how I believe soft skills, and I think you're in the forefront of this, that soft skills are going to be more important now as we move into not only a virtual remote world, but in my opinion, as we continue to dive into and lean into augmented reality or virtual reality and leveraging artificial intelligence. I think the softer skills are going to have to come back in a very strong and important way.
I couldn't agree with you more. And genuinely, this is one of the conversations we often have with organizations. And here's the pivotal point to this. I think our role in any soft skills in developing people is only one aspect of it. You can have a wonderful program and a process around it, but it's not going to yield results unless the other stakeholders are involved and actively participating as well. Let me give you a quick example on this.
Yeah.
Generally, when we do leadership programs, which I think is, we skew heavily towards leadership training in the programs we offer, we always start the process by having conversations with HR, having conversation with key line managers, discussing what some of the key pain points are. And if they don't have a competency framework, we actually ask them, what do we peg behavior to, which is
Hmm.
common business? And if they don't have a competency framework, we generally design one and then start the program, because then we have something to anchor the behavior on. Once again, let me give you a quick example. We often have preconceived notions about what type of leader would work best. And the answer to that question is that depends on the context. Some organizations need a combination of leaders to be present
Hmm.
in order for them to succeed.
Yeah.
Now, if that isn't common and if it is not known, it's very difficult to train somebody on it. Once again, quick example. You might come and talk about servant leadership because that's something that you truly believe in. I would come and talk about collective leadership because that's something I believe in. Anton, on the other hand, might actually come and talk about a coaching style leadership. Now, which of these three are you going to adopt as the organization? If you run programs on all three, you're going to confuse the hell out of everyone.
Yep.
And 9 times out of 10, what happens is the senior management team goes for a program probably on servant leadership. The juniors go for a program on situational leadership. Somebody else goes for a program on coaching and how a leader should be a coach, and so on and so on. And then when you start implementing this inside the organization and putting it into practice, you will find that there are conflicts that takes place. So once we have had that conversation, we build curriculums based on the competency framework, but also the key direction of the business and the key challenges that they face.
Hmm.
And literally, we make sure that the immediate managers are in, or the reporting line managers are involved. And we also make sure that the subordinates are involved. So there's a 360 involvement in the program. We have one-on-one conversations with the participant. We invite the line managers into this. We do a 360 in order to get feedback about the individual. And after we run the workshops, we actually give them pieces of work that they have to do at work. And people give us feedback on how they're doing. Those observations, those conversations, as well as the results they bring through it, is assessed at the end. Now, that entire process takes about 6 to 9 months, typically, as a
Hmm.
minimum. And that is the key. So whatever we are doing as trainers is only one component of it. But the
Yep.
conversations line managers have, the input they offer, the follow-ups that they do, the subordinates' feedback, the conversations they have, the projects that they do collectively with all of the stakeholders being involved, that is what really drives the behavior.
Because
If
essentially
you're
you're designing for the business, right? So you're looking at the 360 holistic view, identifying what's the best leadership. And I'm curious to know, because I know that you have a research arm, like, do you have like specific scenario based playbooks or even data supporting, like based on your industry, your team size, and your goals and what you want to do? These are the best types of leadership components that you should be training at your managerial level. And for the C suite, these are the types of leadership trainings that you should be looking at. Is that something that you're leveraging right now with research or with some sort of data intelligence?
absolutely. And here's how we do it. You identified some of the critical elements that we look at. We do look at the organization and the industry and the maturity of the organization. And by maturity of the organization, I mean the maturity of their processes, practices, systems, as well as policies and procedures.
Interesting.
Now, you can have organizations which are 100 years old, but haven't really matured to being a professionally run organization.
Yeah, I was about to say, how do you
Can
measure maturity? What are the different stages to look at?
Right. There are, in our books, there are 3 stages of maturity. There is certainly infancy and startup. Then there is a certain, we call it the mature stage. And then we do actually talk about the time to change because it's been
Hmm.
running for some time and it's counterproductive. We peg this to the direction of the organization and the objectives they need to achieve. Let me give you an example here. So let's take a typical manufacturing organization. They have 2,000, 3,000 employees. Their objective is to scale that into being about 10,000 employees over the next 3 years. That's double-digit growth,
Yeah,
very aggressive
significant.
growth. However, when we deep dive and do a small study, we will find that they have policies and procedures for almost everything. Let's say they're ISO certified. They have all of the key processes in place, but observations will tell you, and also if you do a simple employee opinion survey,
Mhm.
ask in the question, how many times do you actually put this into practice? If the score is less than 70%, what we say, it's not really a mature organization. It does have things in place, but it's not getting done. So we start there. Now, for that kind of an organization, senior managers do need to empower people more, but at the same time, you do need to follow up a lot more until you make that transition. Now, following up is not micromanaging. There is a fine line. However, if the organization also, and there are other indicators like, for example, attrition rates. If the
Mhm.
attrition rates are really high, that means you have 30% or 40% of the population of the workforce being new.
Yeah.
If that is the case, then we do turn around and say, you know what, for this particular group of people, maybe a more directive style of leadership is required for the initial 6 months, and then switch on to a more collaborative style. And when you're doing, this is how you go about it. So yes, that does get weighed in. It's not, having said that, full disclosure, it's not common, Raul, to have this with all of our clients.
Yeah. No, it
Um,
makes a lot of sense. Because, I mean,
we,
there's a lot of
we
change, right? It's a lot of dynamics and
absolutely,
evolution.
and absolutely, and there are certain organizations that we've been working with for a decade or more, and they've kind of grown into that space with us because there's a level of trust. These are very sensitive topics of conversation. You do need to understand the industry. You need to understand the dynamics. You do need to be respectful of the culture of the organization. And once you've established that, I think they are open to the suggestion a lot more. But when we are starting out with an organization, it would be very common for us to simply run a program, which is by and large pegged to a competency framework and nothing more. Run that program, see the results trickling, and then start having that conversation
Makes a lot of
because it
sense.
is a lot of work.
No, absolutely. How can we as leaders right now, if for our listeners, how can you assess the leadership gauge or what's the best approach to I mean, it's not as in depth or as the whole 360, but how can we have a good assessment of the health of leadership? And because leadership is always evolving, how can we have a good measure in time for either managers or directors or leaders right now in industry?
Yeah, you're really putting me on the spot here, but I'll give you an honest answer to this. I really don't know whether I need to say this out loud. I need to be careful. But genuinely, if you honestly ask me, here's my honest answer. The litmus test of maturity in leadership is
Yeah.
a very simple observation. Do this at your own peril, though. So, fair warning there. The best way you can find out whether you have leadership that is mature and an organization that embraces leadership in its truest sense is for you to be able to take the entire senior leadership out for 2 weeks and see how well the business functions.
Oh yeah. Yep.
Switch
I've
off your phones, go on a retreat, tell the team, we are going to go on a retreat and you won't have us. Our mobiles will be switched off. Run the business for a week. Now, a week might be a bit much, but at least for a couple of days. If your guys can't function without you, for 2 days at least, I think I've answered the question, right?
Absolutely.
With-
And
with-
hey, I
with-
wasn't trying to put you on the spot. I wasn't trying to put you on the spot. I told you we're gonna get deep on this podcast. No, but I agree with
and
you
I did promise
100%.
you to be
I call
honest.
that the same. Yeah, I say that the same as that's the litmus test is how well does the team operate without you? And that is significant in terms of just maturity, but also people being able to have like the practical common sense what to do. And that's in my point, that's like applied leadership.
But let me kind of quickly break that down because it is an important question. I didn't mean that in jest. I genuinely do mean this. And
No,
believe it or
yeah.
not, I do force some of our senior leadership teams that I work with to do just that, to not turn up unannounced completely,
Hmm.
switch off your phones and see what happens. And it's a very scary prospect. It's a bit like telling your son, or well, telling your wife rather, that you're not going to pick up your son and let's see what he does. And he's just
Hmm.
13 years old. Let's see what happens. And both our mobiles are switched off. How would our son react? And how he reacts into that situation is a reflection of us as parents, isn't it? Because we haven't prepped him to be able to make a decision and follow through on it and understand the risks and wait and then take a call on it. We haven't prepped him up for that. We've kept them in a bubble. It would be with good intention, yes, but it brings about a bad result.
Yeah.
And that's true of leaders as well. Sometimes, genuinely, we do this because we love our teams. We don't want them to face the same hardships that we did. We want to cushion them from the big bad world, so to say. And what we do is we incapacitate them. But
Hmm.
since you asked that question, here are a couple of other things that you can observe and do. Number one, apart from actually taking a day off and switching off your phone and see how your team reacts, take a look at who speaks at meetings and whether
Hmm.
people are comfortable enough to challenge the most senior person in the forum. Two, take a look at who generally gets lugged with all the legwork. Is it
Hmm.
always a junior person or is it just a rotational thing? For example, who takes notes at a meeting?
Hmm.
Who will send the calendar invites for a meeting? Now, if the boss and the junior most person takes turns in this, it's a very healthy organization. It's a very mature organization. If it's always the junior most person and generally the management trainees that gets lucked with all of, during my time, it was photocopying and making coffee. That was the litmus test. If your boss made coffee, that's a pretty good sign. If the boss made his own photocopies, that was a very good sign. 9 times out of 10, it was us management trainees who had to do that. And then, very importantly, take a look at when things go wrong, how many of the seniors put their hands up? Or would
Interesting.
it actually get pushed down? Those are some of the things that you can take a look at without any cost, without any time, to see whether you have maturity in leadership within the organization.
Those are really key, and as I reflect them, I see them in actuality, or the teams that I've helped and grow, and the teams that I'm part of. I think it's important to obviously the taking the time off. That's the big litmus test. But I think here to be able to observe, you can do this casually. I think it is important to see and even encourage leaders to take it up on their own because a lot of these things, it's not leadership maturity isn't just, oh, this person has more experience than me or this person has more time in the industry. I think it's more about having the willingness to be self-directive and self-leadership as opposed to just like delegating some decisions or delegating ideas and delegating things and taking pure ownership. I think it always comes back to ownership. I do want to switch gears
Absolutely.
here and because you've co-authored like I don't know how many books, it's a plethora, over 60. And your main point of view, and I agree with you, this is that education can help us get out of poverty. And I do want to kind of close around that statement and your ideas around why you're giving away so many books. And then also where people can go to learn more about the work that you're doing with High Five and Luminary.
All right. So that one is actually with my dad. My dad and I are both
Wow.
products of free education. My dad is the first in his family. Where he comes from, farming family, and most of his relatives do traditional paddy cultivation. So back in the day, to actually come to Colombo and go to university was a big deal. And he was the first in his family to actually come to Colombo. Didn't do his degree straight afterwards, but he did it eventually. And he's very much a socialist at heart. And I guess you have to understand context of these, right? I mean, for
Mhm.
us in Sri Lanka, education is free until your secondary education. And if you pass your A levels, as we call it here, well enough, that's high school for anyone in America. You get the chance to go to university, and university is free,
Hmm.
completely free. And
Nice.
if you come from poor backgrounds, you actually get a small stipend so that you can feed and clothe yourself whilst you educate yourself. So my dad is a product of free education and something he passionately believes still to this date, and he's 80, just turned 80 a few weeks ago, is that knowledge should not be in the domain of the rich. And if it is, that it's, in his words, it's a sin. Knowledge is something that needs to be passed down for free. And I've gotten to loggerheads with this, and I used to tell my dad, I can't do that in my chosen profession. I do need to charge my clients. I do need to make a living. And he would happily turn around and say, yeah, but you don't have to charge that much. So we've been having this banter at home for quite some time.
Yeah.
And giving out the books for free is my way of making peace with my dad. So it wasn't for really altruistic reasons. It's just to make sure that, all right, Dad, I hear you. So here's what I will do. I will literally write everything I know on a particular subject and put it out for free. So during COVID, we had a ton of time, and our trainers and I got together and we started writing practitioner books. And the idea was that they would be aimed at someone in an organizational setting who wanted to know the in and outs of a particular topic. And it should be ideally a one sitting reading, because you're a practitioner anyway, the basics. But here's how you would go about implementing something. So, for example, recruitment and selection. How would you go about it? What are some of the tricks of the trade? Performance management, do's and don'ts. How would you make sure that the performance management system delivers results? Culture. How would you go about setting up a culture, changing a culture, and seeing the cultural fit to the organization that you work with? So we started writing, and it kind of became a bit of a habit. So we've done about, I think, 60 plus books. And I did tell anyone who kind of gets involved, saying, if it's all right with you guys as well, let's put it out for free. And when we mean free, I mean completely free. You don't have to give in your name or your email address or your phone number or your designation or whatever else information to download the book. You just click and it downloads, and it's all on our website. So anyone could just go in and download any book they want or all the books they want.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah. And I was actually reviewing that website before yours. That's really exciting and really awesome.
Thank you very much.
If you found value in today's podcast, please consider sharing this with someone that you believe could also benefit from this episode. You never know, you may be the catalyst that opens them up to a new way of operating their business and experiencing life. As always, it's an honor to be a small part of your journey. This is Raul Hernandez. Do good work.